I raise a hallelujah in the presence of my enemies.
Good night, all, and welcome. Okay, so I'm seeing more persons on tonight. It's such an honor, for us to be here together as we talk about something so sensitive, sexual grooming and abuse. It's a sensitization session. Why now? But we will go into that in a bit. I still want to encourage you to share the live, share this link right now as we're about to begin. So my name is Verkisha Graham Leto, known as Verkisha G. As you can see, I am a Christian life coach, and I also run Verkisha Graham Counseling and Consulting Services. I'm also the founder of The Haven. You're going to hear more about that later. So if you want to contact me, there's my email, there's my WhatsApp. If you call that number, you're not going to get me, so you will have to WhatsApp me, okay? So a little bit about myself before we really begin. I'm the CEO and founder of Verkisha Graham Counseling and Consulting Services. I'm also the founder of The Haven, which is a safe space for women. Okay, we have been up and running since 2019. I'm also the holder of a bachelor's in behavioral sciences, a master's in criminal psychology, and I'm completing my second master's in counseling psychology. I wanted someone to read my bio for me. When you read your own bio, it's like you're tooting your own horn, but I'm not. I'm not. But I'm doing this so that you feel comfortable, that you're here in the right place with persons who care about you and with persons who are well qualified, right? So I have a certificate in CSI Forensic Science. I did some professional work in Caribbean defense and security, and I'm a trained life coach specializing in social emotional first aid, and I preach about self-discovery and work-life balance, self-awareness, all things related to self. I worked in the Trinidad and Tobago prison services, the Trinidad and Tobago police services, the bank, and adjunct lecturer at USC, the University of the Southern Caribbean. I'm also a member of the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Psychologists, although I'm not currently in Trinidad and Tobago right now, but I still do some work with them. And I'm a member of the International Association of Crime Analysts. So that's me. Oh, another fun fact, I love to dance in front of the mirror. So here tonight, I have special people with me, but you're gonna know about them, our presenters, two, a psychologist and a criminologist and a counselor, and you will hear more about them later. Some more persons are coming into the room, let me admit them. Okay, so for our sensitization session tonight, our main aim is to sensitize individuals on the gravity of sexual grooming and abuse, and provide the tools and techniques needed to identify, cope, and heal from sexual grooming and abuse. So our goals, we have four main goals: to define what is sexual grooming and sexual abuse, to discuss the signs of sexual grooming and sexual abuse, to provide the tools and techniques to cope with being sexually groomed or abused, to engage in active discussion on sexual grooming. As you can see, we are diving straight into it. We don't want to stay too long because we know, persons have to work tomorrow. But this quote by Martin Luther King Jr., he said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." I want to repeat that. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Food for thought. And some of us may be familiar with the context of why we're here and why we are doing all of this. Now, in Trinidad, for some of you all who may be well aware, there has been this situation that occurred within the Seventh-day Adventist community. I wouldn't say it's the first time. We all know it's not the first time, right? However, what we do know is that what was hidden came to light. One of ours, Keisha, right? She was sexually groomed, and there was that case of sexually abused as well. And it came to the forefront quite recently. And I was looking around and I'm like, okay, what's happening? I'm looking to see who's doing anything of this nature. And I'm not seeing anything. And it's hurting me because I know there are persons who may not be talking about things and they may not know where to go and they want to know more. They want to learn more. I mean, how much Google we could Google? We need that interpersonal interaction, right? We need that. And that's what we want to form here. We want to help encourage you. We want to motivate you. We don't want to sit here and just talk about all the bad things that was done, but we want to present you with facts. We want to debunk some myths. We really want to look at the situation surrounding sexual grooming. Some persons don't believe in sexual grooming, Yeah. Some persons don't believe it exists. Some persons are also saying, well, if they're both adults, how can it be sexual grooming? How can it be sexual abuse? So we really want to psychoeducate you. We want to learn together. We want to grow together, because this not just affects our victims, but it affects everyone involved. Your neighbor, your family, and even you yourself may have been a victim. And we want to be here for each other, right? So this is the context. This is why we're talking about this. This is why we're here. We're here out of love. We're here out of concern. If you came tonight, as we say in the Trini local parlance and probably other places, to Mako, because you're thinking we're going to reveal identities and we're going to really get down and talk about who was wrong, or even show the article or read the article, we are not going to do that here. We really want to look at sensitizing you on sexual grooming and sexual abuse. Okay? And thanks so much for being here again. So I want to know how much you know. So this is our icebreaker. I'm going to show you a video, but before I show you that video, these are the questions I want you to think about, to discuss when you have completed watching the video. So the first question, what do you think was grooming? So in that video, ask yourself, what do you think was grooming? What were some of the signs? Could the victims have prevented the situation from happening? Ask yourself, what were some actions they could have taken? Did sexual abuse occur? Yeah? And what should be the consequences for the pastor? What should be the consequences of the manager in the situation that you're going to look at? And what would you have done if it happened to you? Okay? So these are the questions. If you want, you could screenshot it or you can write it down. But these are the questions we are seeking to answer as I break you out into some groups. Don't be afraid. I want you to discuss. I want you to be open as I show you this video, okay? So we're going to look at the video, have your questions, have your answers, and then we're going to go into the group and discuss all that we just saw.
When a person manipulates you to gain your trust, it's called grooming.
And grooming can happen to anyone, but it doesn't happen overnight.
And by the time you realize something's wrong,
you feel like you can't stop it. Senior Pastor Paul was the head guy at my church. Everyone loved him. Because of him, I wanted to be a church leader. So I talked to him whenever I could. When he picked me to be his assistant at church, my parents were so proud. I could see my whole future ahead of me.
Thanks for the help again, Lucas. I'd be lost without you.
He was a great mentor.
Maybe you could do more on
We talked about guy stuff and growing up and life, and everything made sense. He made me feel smart, and when I felt lonely, he could always tell. He was my friend. The church was my whole world. I wanted to be just like Pastor Paul. So if his long hugs made me uncomfortable, or his touches confused me, I'd tell myself I was wrong for feeling that way. Because I trusted him. He was supposed to be right.
For me, the attention I got from my boss messed with my head, you know? I thought I was supposed to like it. I was stoked to have a job and to be making money. But when my boss AJ was around, things got confusing. She'd get close and talk about how I was her best worker and favorite guy. At first, the attention was nice, and an older woman maybe being into me? Every guy's dream, right? She'd invite me to hang out in her office and gave me beer.
Sometimes Paul picked me for special work with him.
I've got some more work to do in my office. Do you want to join me, Lucas?
I felt important, even though when we were alone, he would do weird things. Sometimes when we were in his office, he would show me porn. He said it was to teach me about sin and temptation. When he touched me, he said it was a way for people to show love, but it made me feel sick.
AJ was my first boss. Fresh Pack was my first job. And money was freedom, you know? And I wanted to keep my job. So I played along. Until this one night, when I closed. Hey, AJ, nobody else is scheduled for the night shift.
No, it's just gonna be us. You'll keep me safe.
My shift was almost over when it happened. I wish I could say I wasn't freaked out, but I was. It was one of those moments where your mind just goes numb, you know? And I tried to get a handle on what was happening, but all that came into my head was, I have to go.
With Paul, it got to a point where I couldn't ignore my feelings anymore.
You remind me a lot of myself as a boy, Lucas. Here, I think you'll enjoy this.
I kept telling myself, he's my friend. He's supposed to be looking out for me. But what if that's not true? And nobody would believe me anyway. In that moment, I just wanted out. Stop! I'd heard stories about weird things happening with coaches or church leaders before, but it can be hard to see when it's happening to you. In the beginning, grooming just looks like friendship, because praise, attention, and even some affection can feel harmless at first.
AJ was my boss, so it felt like I had to keep her happy to keep my job. But even though the special treatment felt good sometimes, I didn't want to feel uncomfortable at work.
Paul made me feel important, and everyone trusted him, even my parents. And he was always supposed to be in the right. Even though he gave me responsibility and praise, the way he acted made me feel sick to my stomach.
No matter how much power someone has or what you think might happen when you say no, if they make you feel uncomfortable, they're in the wrong.
I told my parents and the police, and even though everything finally stopped, I still can't believe the power Paul had over me.
Even if it's gone on a long time, and you've gone along with it, you can still speak up for yourself, get away, or get help.
Yes. So we're back. Thank you so much. Offense of attempted rape. very legalistic. Here we going. And is liable upon conviction for imprisonment for a term which shall not be less than 5 years, but which may be enhanced to imprisonment for life. Beverly, put in the chat, where did you get that from, the source of that, so we can have that legislation. So as we continue, I want to introduce you to our first speaker for tonight, who will be talking about sexual grooming. Ms. Deborah Gibran. She's a psychologist attached to the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Psychologists with a practice.
Recall today.
Can you mute your mics? Yeah, good. With a practice in educational psychology. She also has her own psychology firm. She has been providing psychological services and counseling for over 7 years. And she has been in the educational sector for at least 10. In addition to her private practice, she has worked and interned in psychological settings such as child and youth mental health, child and family counseling centers, child-centered trauma counseling programs, and schools. But her passion is really to bring healing to persons who have been through traumatic and stressful situations. At work, she uses an integrative approach to which she combines elements of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, family systems theory, positive and humanistic psychology, mindfulness, and play therapy. Ms. Deborah Gibran, I hand this over to you now. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Graham, and I am very glad to be here tonight to share this information, something which we already speak about, something that is very, unique in its own self, because people look at sexual abuse, but they don't look at sexual grooming, and that's the precursor to sexual abuse. So, can start the presentation now. So what is sexual grooming? So according to the American Bar Association, sexual grooming is a preparatory process. So it takes time in which a perpetrator gradually gains a person's trust with the intent to be sexually isolated, abusive, sorry. So in other words, grooming is a form of abuse that involves manipulating someone, until they are isolated, dependent, and more vulnerable to the exploitation. Grooming is when someone builds a relationship, trust, and emotional connection with a child, a young person, or an adult, so they can manipulate, exploit, and eventually abuse them. Grooming is the slow, methodological, intentional use of manipulating a person to a point where they can be victimized. And it happens to almost anyone, by almost anyone. Next slide. We can't talk about sexual grooming without talking about online grooming, because this is how it starts as well. So most people, most of us talk to people online. It's a great way to stay connected. It can even be, a good way of making new friends, new connections. But it's really important to understand the dangers of talking to someone you don't know. Online grooming is when someone uses the internet to trick, force, or pressure a person into doing something sexual. Some of the things that they ask you to do is to have sexual conversations online. They send this text messages, They would ask you to send naked images of yourself, which is sometimes called sexting. They would ask you to do something sexually live on a webcam. So let's start with grooming children. This is something that is very important because it happens a lot and most people are not aware of it. So abusers may groom children for weeks, for months, for years before any sexual abuse takes place. Sometimes they get caught before. Abusers often seek children who are loners, You know, they find ways to fill a need, giving them attention, offering to spend time with them, perhaps making statements like, I know how it is to need a friend. I see you are alone. Grooming usually begins with the behaviors that do not even seem appropriate. They may include, you know, testing the child's boundaries, like, you know, telling them inappropriate jokes, giving them back rubs, tickling, or even playing sexual games. So moving from non-sexual touching to accidental touching, it can happen during play. So the child may not even be able to identify that this is something purposeful, that is something inappropriate. It will be something that is so confusing to the child because this contact will make them feel uncomfortable. But when these groomers make it seem as if it's okay, you know, I can be a friend, I can, you know, buy you stuff, you know, you're by yourself, you have problems at home, this is where it starts. Let's look at adolescence. So in terms of adolescence, grooming adolescents, it's almost the same thing as, you know, grooming children, but this takes a little more work. Identifying with the adolescent. The abuser may appear to be the only one to understand him, you know, same aspects, you know, needing a friend, being lonely, having issues at home, domestic violence, things like that. The groomer would do his homework or her homework. Some of the things that the abuser identify: display common interests, feel the need for attention, as I said, you know, communicating outside the role. Next slide. All right, so grooming adults. When most people think about grooming, they think about children, they think about adolescents. But as was mentioned before in the conversation, adults are vulnerable to grooming too. In this part of the presentation, we'll be looking at, you know, we'll explore more of the issue of adult grooming, including the signs of grooming that persons should look out for. Adult grooming is correspondent to children, you know, to child grooming. It applies to any situation where an adult is primed to allow him or herself to be exploited or abused. And it can happen due to sexual or financial situations. You have, for example, someone may have, in terms of financial, they will look at the elderly. They may think that the elderly has money. You know, they worked in certain places, they have a big inheritance, things like that, and they would try to facilitate themselves into the lives of this adult to groom them for financial gain. Next slide, please. So this is the part that I want to focus on a little, the grooming process. Grooming is a subtle, gradual, escalating process of building trust with children or adults to gain access to and time alone with them. It is deliberate and purposeful. Dr. Grant Cinnamon is a clinical psychologist, and he identified with 7 stages of the grooming process, which will be spoken about here. The first stage is selecting the victim. That is where predators or abusers identify individuals who may have some kind of vulnerability. And that vulnerability may fall under financial problems, emotional issues, family concerns, person who isolate themselves. The second stage is victim research. So here's where the abuser obtains, you know, personal information about the victim. How do they do that? Now remember, the abuser or perpetrator or predator, groomer, he or she is a known person. This person is very charismatic. He or she would be persons in the church, like pastors, ministers. They could be counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists. They can be teachers. They could be almost anyone. So this usually happens, this second part of it, the victim research, happens where they would speak to friends and family of the victim to gain information in terms of hobbies. What is the person's hobbies? What are their likes? What they dislike? What is happening with them? Finding out the business, more or less. He or she would communicate this from the families to find out about all these things so that they would start to show concern and care. So family and friends will say, oh, my pastor really care about me. Oh, my teacher really care about this one or that one. This is how they get children as well, right? So they will offer things like simple tasks. They will help the victim, help them with simple tasks like helping them put a project together. They would give them compliments about, I didn't know you could do this. It's so amazing what you can do. Things like that to engage the person in conversation. It's important to note, though, at this stage that because the predator is seen as someone who holds high esteem, family and friends may even encourage the victim to seek support from the predator or the abuser. The third stage is personal connection. So here the friendship begins to deepen so as to gain trust. The abuser may use words like us only to encourage secrecy, to make the victim feel special, as well as to normalize the relationship. They would also share intimate secrets about their own lives, such as emotional problems that they may be having at home, with their families, or something that happened in the workplace, things like that. The fourth, meeting the victim's needs. So according to Dr. Grant, in this stage, the predator or the groomer, he or she tries to secure this trustworthiness in the victim's eyes by using information that they gain from the friends and the family to make the victim feel like, this is a true friend to me. So often, any kind of uneasiness that may have been with the victim at the onset of the relationship, it starts to diminish little by little as the predator is now seen as dependable, trusting. This stage is also the cornerstone of the plan, where the predator's capability to ascertain or to make sure that sense of trust will create an easy path to access for sexual abuse. The fifth stage is priming the victim for the abuse. So we talk about all this trust, so all the buildup of trust, being a good friend, having common issues, being seen in the environment, that's with the friends and the family or the workers, in the environment as trustworthy. And this person is liked by many, so it will make sense in the victim's eyes that he or she would eventually succumb to the abuser. During this stage, which is priming the victim, there's an escalation by the predator with regards to their sexual behavior. So for example, hugs become longer and closer when you're saying goodbye. They may start to linger in for a kiss. So, you're hugging, you're putting your face close to them. They may also encourage the victim to, talk more about their sexual experiences, their sexual fantasies, like, what do you prefer sexually, creating this opportunity to find out more, but it based more on sexuality now. So as everything goes according to the plan, the abuser will contribute to push boundaries to create more intimacy. So from the hugging, you go on more to kissing, their hands will linger on the body, They will have to touch, but it becomes more intimate than just a simple touch or a casual touch. And their target may try to make it, they will do this with their target to make it seem like it is a normal reaction. The sixth is instigating sexual contact. So at this stage, as long as the predator feels that the victim is, sufficiently primed and the level of trust is gained, he or she will then begin to initiate more intense sexual engagement. Seventh, controlling the victim. The emotional outcomes from how the relationship was during grooming will be far different now. The victim can become so conditioned and so dependent on the predator that he or she, will hardly likely be able to resist. This stage now, this phase, sets the stage for our next topic on sexual abuse, which will follow this part of the presentation. Okay, so let's look at signs of grooming. Here are some of the signs that you should look out for of grooming, right? So the person becomes withdrawn. They may seem troubled by something, but they don't really want to talk about it. Alternatively, their emotions might become more volatile or unstable. They wouldn't be able to self-regulate because they're all over the place. You may also notice them using or wearing something new, because it's like if they are dating, because in their mind, they're thinking that this person is genuine. You may, groomers often isolate their targets from their families. They want to have them all by themselves. So if they seem reluctant to see you as a friend or talk to you as a sister, brother, daughter, a son, a nephew, whatever the case may be, a brother, or they refuse, to have anything to do with you, someone could be manipulating them. You may notice that in some instances, sums of money are missing from their account. The person might be spending more time on the phone or online, but they won't say what they're doing or who they're speaking to. They may start talking about a new friend. They may even become more preoccupied. So ask yourself these questions. Does this person ask, this is for the groomer. So when you are in a new relationship, maybe you can ask yourself these questions. Does this person ask about very personal information early in your friendship? Does this person want to keep the relationship a secret? Do they want to meet alone? Do you feel pressured into doing or saying things? Are you uncomfortable with the sudden intimacy? Have they asked about your sexual experiences or ask how you feel about certain sexual things? We look at the victims. Now the victims, the predator is adept in identifying victims or targets that he or she may want to, need or want. So these make targets vulnerable to anyone who can exploit them. So persons, men, women, children, vulnerable, we discussed that earlier, lonely, naive, in financial need. Some may have psychological, emotional issues, family issues. Those are the things that the victim tries to, the predator tries to instigate in terms of finding or choosing a victim for grooming. Next slide. So who grooms? Many who do sexually groom, they come across as trustworthy, dependable, caring, and they may present themselves, as we said before, in professions such as pastors, public figures, school coaches, psychologists, counselors, teachers. So the outward credentials, it makes it easier for them to make a connection, and gain a sense of trust from their victim, from the family and friends of the victim. Groomers are master manipulators who know how to get what they want out of an individual. This is part of the reason so many persons never report this type of abuse due to questions like, people will ask, how could she fall for that? How she didn't know, why she didn't just leave, why he didn't just speak up. But the groomer creates an external persona of a trustworthy person. So it's hard. It's very, very hard. What they say is that many of these groomers suffer, next slide, from one or two of the personality disorders. This is what research have shown. So narcissistic personality disorder, a lot of people probably would have heard about this. It's a symptom that is used in others for personal gain without consideration of the other person's experience of being used. The antisocial personality thrives on the pretense and deception, which allow them a sense of domination. So what they're saying is that sometimes some research has said that there is an underlying effect that affects the person who is doing the grooming. So effects of grooming. Grooming can have, short, long-term effects, and it can last a lifetime. Children, young people, young adults and adults may live with things like anxiety and depression, eating disorders, PTSD. Children may not be able to function at school, even adults as well. Difficulty coping with stress. They might even engage in self-harm like cutting. They may have suicidal ideations. Pregnancy, they will have feelings of shame and guilt. They may start to drink or smoke because they are feeling this depression. So this is the things that will happen. They would have relational problems with their family, their peers, their friends, and all of that. So what can we do? We have support systems in Trinidad and Tobago. We have the TTPS. We have the TT National Sex Offender Registry. You could call 991. We have Families in Action. We have the Rape Crisis Society of Trinidad and Tobago. We have Friends and Family, which is very, very important, which is a huge support system. We also have psychologists and counselors like us in this forum, where you can come to get advice, you can come to get help, and seek something to help with this situation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deborah Gibran. It's so important because we not only have persons here from Trinidad and Tobago, but from different parts of the world, and wherever you are, inquire as to your emergency numbers, your National Sex Offender Registry. Get these numbers handy. And if there's a trusted person you can speak with, I'm here as well. My contact is there if you want to get in contact with me or any one of the presenters here. But there is help. You're not alone. And I know some persons have already begun their healing process and their journey. And we want to say that we're so proud of you. We want to continue empowering you to continue. But on that note, I want to introduce you, if you're not part of a support group, we have the Haven, as I mentioned before, and the Haven is our safe space, our safe place. I believe God gave me this vision to start this women's empowerment group back in 2019. We have been running. It's a small group of women, but hey, we're open to you. If you'd like to join us, feel free to do so. You can WhatsApp me on 492-1228. We meet every other Friday night, for our ladies meetup and prayer night. And you can also follow us on Instagram via tt_the_Haven. So, the Haven comprises of women from all walks of life. And one thing we share is our desire to become our authentic selves in Christ. So we are Christian women who believe in the power of prayer and who believe in the power of holding each other as we walk together, right? Through healing and through growth and through development. So I just want to put that out there. You can also visit me on my Facebook. I put that form there. You should also get a form in your chat. If you're really interested in joining this support group, you can fill out that form there. I want to introduce you to our second speaker Also, I want to let you know this is we are going until 9:30. So thanks for still being here. Very interesting. You still have time to share so persons can get into the second part of the sensitization session, okay? So our next speaker who will be talking about sexual abuse. She is Ms. Tia Marie Bacchus. And Ms. Tia Marie Bacchus is a victim and witness support officer who's attached to the Victim and Witness Support Unit of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. She is also an appointed general assessor and adjunct instructor at the Police Academy for General Policing, where I used to work. Her educational background in both the mind and the body gives her a unique and effective approach to the helping profession. She holds a Master's of Science degree in Criminology with Criminal Justice and a Bachelor of Science degree where she majored in Psychology and double minored in Criminology and Sociology at UE. Additionally, she is also a prospective candidate for a PhD in criminology, criminal justice, but a concentration in victimology. I know Tia Marie, and she's so much invested in victims. Ms. Bacchus also possesses further credentials in counseling victims of trauma. No doubt she's a human rights advocate, and she's passionate about, that stand against gender-based violence. And she works with many communities. I want to introduce you now to Ms. Tia Marie Bacchus. Ms. Tia Marie Bacchus, because I just call her Tia. So every time I have to say the Marie after, my tongue gets a bit tight. But here I want to give you over to Ms. Tia Marie Bacchus.
Hi, good night, everyone. It is truly a pleasure to be here tonight, whereby I can share on sexual abuse, all right, and really bring awareness to this sensitive topic. The objectives for this presentation are to provide an overview of sexual abuse, to provide an understanding on the TNT legislation on sexual abuse, to examine the aftermath of sexual abuse, to provide strategies for maintaining safety and to cope with sexual abuse, and also to provide resources for victims and survivors of crime. Next slide, please. So first, we're going to start with some myths and facts about rape and sexual assault. And here's where you guys can be interactive and speak to me. You can unmute your mics so I can hear your lovely voices as well. All right, so the first one, there's no surefire way to identify a rapist. Many appear completely normal, friendly, charming, and non-threatening. Is that a fact or is that a myth? Anyone?
That's a fact.
That's a fact. That's a fact. Excellent. It is, because there's no way that you can identify this person, all right, by the way that they look or act. All right. Next, if you didn't fight back, you must not have thought it was that bad. Is that a myth or is that a fact? That's a myth. That's a myth. Excellent, excellent, exactly. Because during sexual assault, it's important that it is extremely common to that their response is to freeze, right? Because of the shock, because of the trauma, that they freeze, all right? Their body and their brain shuts down in shock, making it difficult for them to move or speak or even think, to do anything, all right? The next one, people who are raped ask for it, quote unquote, ask for it by the way they dress or act. Is that a fact or is that a myth?
Myth.
Myth. Excellent. Thank you for that.
Myth.
Somebody scream out myth. I love it. Yes, and that is a myth because rape is a crime of opportunity. Studies show that rapists choose victims based on their vulnerability, not on how sexy they appear or how flirtatious they may act. All right, so excellent, excellent. The last one, well, second to last one, date rape is often a misunderstanding. Is that a myth or is that a fact? date rape is often a misunderstanding. Is that a myth or is that a fact?
That's a myth.
That's a myth. Excellent. Because date rapists often defend themselves by claiming the assault was a drunken mistake or a miscommunication. However, research shows that the vast majority of date rapists are repeat offenders. All right. The last one. It's not rape if you've had sex with a person before. What do you think about that? Is that a myth or is that a fact?
A myth.
It's a myth. Yeah.
Yes, myth.
Myth. Excellent. Excellent. And the Sexual Offences Act of Trinidad and Tobago shows that that is definitely a myth, because they would have outlined the different types, such as spousal rape, such as boyfriend to girlfriend or lover forces sex on the other person. It's rape, right? Just because you've previously consented to sex, it doesn't mean that if you say no now, that you don't have that right to say no now, right? You always have that right to say no. All right, next, what is sexual assault? So the definition I have here is that sexual assault is defined as any unwanted sexual act. Sexual abuse is an unwanted sexual activity with perpetrators using force, making threats, or taking advantage of victims not able to give consent. With that being said, it's important that we note that sexual violence is motivated by desires. I am hearing myself. I'm not sure if someone has them. Can everyone mute
Go
their-
ahead. Yeah. They're muted.
All right, thank you so much. All right, so what we would have just stated is that sexual assault is defined as an unwanted sexual act. Sexual violence is motivated by a desire for power and control over the victim, whereby sex is used as a weapon to exert that level of power. And we would have seen in sexual grooming where sexual violence was motivated by power. And we would have seen that level of power exerted in different spaces. All right. We also just want to quickly mention the capacity to consent. All right. Many times in sexual assault cases, it's important that we remember that victims are not able to give consent. And someone would have asked earlier in terms of the difference between courting and dating, courting and grooming. Consent, the capacity to give consent, right? Whereby both parties agree. All right. Next is the sexual violence continuum. And here's where we can see the different types of sexual assault. All right, sexual violence is a continuum. It includes rape, date rape, marital rape, acquaintance rape, sexual assault, unsolicited pictures, stalking, online harassment, catcalling, degrading attitudes. And as we are seeing here on the PowerPoint, we're seeing at the top of the spectrum or at the top of the continuum, there's rape, sexual assault. At the bottom, there's catcalling, degrading attitudes. And we see that sexual harassment is low in terms of action for the problem, but it's common. And we'll go more into that as to why that occurs. But we see sexual assault as high in terms of the recognition of that problem, in terms of action being taken. But we see that it's less common. All right, so what drives that? Does sexual abuse occur often? All right, what is the prevalence of gender-based violence, sexual assault, any type of gender-based violence, intimate partner violence in the Caribbean? And here's where we're going to answer that question. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide, please. No. Next slide. It should be. Yes, right? And here's where we're going to answer that question in terms of prevalence of gender-based violence. All right. According to a report by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime and Latin America and the Caribbean region of the world, violence against women affects a significant population of women and girls in the Caribbean. If we don't say it with facts, we don't say it at all. And that is why I have some statistics here for you guys. All right. So based on this report done by the UNDP Caribbean Human Development Report, it indicates that 30.4% of women in the Caribbean report higher rates of fear of sexual assault in comparison to 11.1% of men. Moreover, it is indicated that violent crime has been increasing in the Caribbean, and this is accompanied by a decrease in both case clear-up and conviction rates. As it relates to the prevalence of gender-based violence in the Caribbean, we have some statistics that we would have shown here, and those statistics, it's important that we recognize that as much as we have the statistics here, it is still underrepresented. And it is underrepresented because of the culture of silence. And it's important that we recognize this factor as we are speaking about intimate partner violence. The culture of silence, it is widely acknowledged that police statistics do not represent the true picture as regards to the incidence of gender-based violence, since many persons do not report to the police, and this can be because of shame, stigma, and so on. And this is called the dark figure, whereby it's a huge amount of unreported official crime data, and this is the factor influencing the lack of reporting. So as much as we would have shared this information, there's still so much more. And that's why it's important that we do have these different sensitization sessions so that we can empower different individuals by educating them. Another example in terms of the culture of silence is male victimization. And that male victimization is so pertinent that we do discuss in terms of our society is aware of female victims often, but sometimes we tend to neglect or forget about the male victims. And this is due to male victims may not report due to shame or stigma, all right? But it is a major social issue. Next slide, well, which is this, the rape culture. Right. So the rape culture pyramid depicts how normalization of catcalling, insensitive jokes about rape, sexism can eventually cause crimes such as child molestation, domestic violence, and even murder. All right, and as we see on the pyramid here, we're seeing at the top, we're seeing rape, we're seeing drugging, and at the bottom, we're seeing sexist attitudes. All right, we're seeing rape jokes, we're seeing stalking. And this rape culture is an environment in which rape is prevalent and in which sexual violence against women is normalized and excused in the media and popular culture. When I say popular culture, I want you to think about dancehall. Think about the lyrics. Think about the misogynistic language. Think about the objectification of women's bodies. Think about the glamorization of sexual violence, all right? Whereby this music or this popular culture degrades women's rights and women's safety, all right? Rape culture affects every woman. All right, next slide, please. Rape culture says she asked for it. Rape culture trivializes the sexual assault, meaning boys will be boys. They can be aggressive. Boys will be boys. Teaching women to avoid being raped instead of teaching men not to rape. This is what rape culture encourages. Rape culture publicly scrutinizes the victim's stress, their mental state, and this is a part of victim blaming as well. So you contributed to this. It also influences the tolerance of sexual harassment. It's okay, this is what we're accustomed to. All right, next slide, please. We would have spoken about the prevalence. All right, and when we think about sexual assault, another part of the prevalence in sexual assault is the 6th stage of grooming, which is maintaining control. So once that sexual abuse occurs, the offender commonly uses 1, the child's affection, secrecy, blame, or threat, and sometimes violence. They may even extend to destroying the child's toys or comforting possessions to maintain that child's participation, and silence. As it relates to adults, we would have explored the adults' grooming, all right, earlier on. And another way that it is maintained is through the 6th stage, which is that level of control, maintaining control. And that maintaining control starts with in the stages of grooming, we saw targets. So they identify someone who is vulnerable and who has a need. They recognize this. 2, gain trust and information. So I'm learning about this need. This is the experience of this adult who is groomed. 3, they fill that need. I recognize your need is attachment, your need for attention, there's problems at home, I am going to fulfill that need. You need a listening ear, I am that person. I'm fulfilling that need. Whether it's providing stability, friendship, family, love, drugs, gifts. Then I isolate you. Then the abuse occurs. Now, how am I going to maintain this abuse? And the maintaining of this abuse can be done with fear. The fear factor, manipulation, secrecy, blame. I'm going to blame you, right? And this is another form of manipulation, even violence, where I'm going to coerce you. And it's important that we remember the cycle of, you skipped the slide. Thank you. It's important that we remember the cycle or the stages of grooming. In terms of, I would have gained information on you, I would have developed a level of trust with you. So I know you. So now I know how to keep you in that space. All right. So this in itself also perpetuates the adult grooming. Next slide, please. How can we recognize the signs of sexual abuse? So we recognize the prevalence, but how can we recognize these signs? There are behavioral signs. The signs of abuse aren't always obvious. And learning the warning signs of child abuse can be life-saving. You might notice behavioral or physical changes, and even in the adults. In terms of behavioral, for a child, behavioral signs will be shying away from physical contact, and you can even see that in adults as well. You know, shying away from that physical contact, that regressive behavior. All right, change in hygiene routines, such as refusing to bathe, bathing excessively because they feel dirty somewhat. Age-appropriate sexual behaviors, sleep disturbances, or even nightmares. Some physical signs are bruising or swelling of the genital area. All right. Some verbal signs are using words or phrases that are too adult for the age appropriate for that child, or unexplained silence, whereby this individual withdraw from everyone. All right. This person is suddenly less talkative. And in recognizing the signs, say something, report the crime if you see sexual assault occurring. All right. The rights of the sexual assault victims. Sexual assault is a crime. So as I said earlier, see something, say something. And for the survivors, for someone who may be a victim, remember that you have rights. Sexual assault is a crime. You have the right to say no at any point. Even if you started and you change your mind, here is where you rescind your consent. You can change your mind. All right. Next slide, please. Effects. So now let's go into the experience of this victim or survivor of sexual assault. Regardless of the age or gender, the impact of sexual violence goes far beyond the physical injuries. The trauma of being raped or sexually assaulted can be shattering, leaving you feeling scared, ashamed, alone, plagued by nightmares, flashbacks, and other unpleasant memories. The world doesn't feel like a safe place anymore because now you no longer feel safe in your own space. All right? You no longer trust others. You don't even trust yourself. You may question your judgment, your self-worth. You may even question your sanity. All right? And these are some psychological effects. You may blame yourself for what happened, believe that you're dirty in somewhat. You might believe that you're damaged goods. Relationships now feel dangerous. It's no longer something that you want to engage in. Intimacy may seem impossible. And on top of that, like many other survivors, some persons may experience PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or anxiety, or even develop depression. But it's important to remember that what you are experiencing is a normal reaction to trauma. And these feelings of helplessness, shame, and self-blame are symptoms and not your reality. Does that make sense?
It does.
All right, thank you so much. All right, next slide, please. In terms of recovering from sexual trauma takes time. And it is a healing process. And this healing process is unique to everyone. And it can be painful. But it's important that you remember that you can regain that sense of control and rebuild your self-worth and learn to heal. And I say learn to heal because what happens in a traumatic situation is that we respond based on survival. So we have survival responses, trauma responses. So it's important that now we learn new healthy coping skills. All right. So you ask yourself, how have I coped in the past? What have I done? Ask yourself, now, what am I doing now? And at the end of the presentation, I want you to ask yourself, what can I do to cope more effectively, futuristically? All right, so the first, recovering from sexual violence and assault isn't an easy journey, but it is possible to manage and heal from trauma. All right, so it's important that you remember that. So the first one is to consider speaking with a mental health professional. Whether this assault would have happened years ago or yesterday, a mental health professional can offer several ways to help you cope with the mental health effects of sexual violence and assault. They can help you to manage the feelings and learn new coping skills. All right? As it relates to social support. Social support can come from your family and friends, and social support can also come from a safe community. And this safe community is a meaningful support system in terms of safe haven, whereby you can now engage with a group of individuals who are able to guide and assist along this path, along this journey, and to help you treat with the aftermath of sexual trauma, or even a support group specifically for sexual assault, whereby you can know you don't have to feel like as though you have to hide the symptoms or the reminders of the trauma, but instead that social engagement would now help you to recognize that this is a part of the journey, these are symptoms, and this is not your reality. All right. The last one is to build self-care toolbox, to build a self-care toolbox. And this is what you can do with your mental health professional, whereby you will learn different coping strategies, skills to help you calm your body, whether it's yoga, whether it's progressive muscle relaxation, or fit to help those physiological responses. They would also help you to build and learn some strategies to face your fears. Many survivors of sexual assault go to great lengths to avoid anything that reminds them of what would have occurred. However, speaking with a mental health professional, it can help you to discover new healthy coping skills so that you can now combat that fear that you are facing, and also skills to help you manage those intrusive thoughts, those flashbacks, all right, and to help you address them so that it doesn't take a toll on your psychological well-being. All right, next slide. Many times we're asked, how can I help a friend? How can I help somebody who has experienced sexual assault? First, let's get educated. Educated on what is sexual assault, how it occurs, what are the signs. Like today, this is a sensitization session, so you're able to get that information, so now you can assist. Maintain confidentiality. It's important that you do, because this person would have trusted you with the information, so you maintain that confidentiality. All right, ask the person, how can I help? How can I help? Remember that this person is the expert of their experience. All right, establish boundaries, because trust would have been broken, psychological safety would have been broken, so establish boundaries. Encourage professional help, all right, and honor their recovery. And lastly, resources. So in terms of resources, we have some resources that that can guide persons so that they can seek professional help. But first, we're going to start with emotional safety planning. All right, so regulate your breathing, and regulate your breathing so that it is slow, even from the belly button. So you recognize that you would have experienced a trauma reminder, and you're feeling scared. You feel as though the trauma is reoccurring again. Regulate your breathing. All right. Carry a soothing object or an essential oil in your pocket so that you can use in the event that you are triggered at some point. All right. Next slide. Physical safety planning. In the event that for physical safety planning, there are different methods that you can use. One, in terms of immediate danger, contact the emergency contact, which is the police officers for emergency response. If you would have been assaulted and you feel the fear factor is intense, seeing the person around, you feel endangered, you don't feel safe in your environment, apply for a protection order. All right, you can even ask the police officers to do a drive-by in your area if you feel as though you're not feeling safe in your home environment. There are some other strategies in terms of installing or updating the home security system in terms of changing the lock. All right. And the next one is, next slide. digital. Reduce close social media accounts. All right, reduce or close your social media accounts. So if it is you recognize that you're constantly being reminded, this is what you can do. You can reduce the social media accounts so that you don't encounter it as much. Change the privacy levels and limit what you share on social media. So that in itself limits the engagement. All right, and these are some professional assistance that you can seek. All right. And if it is you want to ask yourself, when is time for me to seek professional help? When coping mechanisms have not worked. So I've developed relaxation, carrying. I have my 3 coping skills that I usually use, and it's no longer working again. Maybe I need further help. If it is I'm constantly negatively thinking about everything that occurs, it's always a negative pattern, then maybe I need some external assistance. You are the expert of your experience. You. So you would know when you need that assistance. All right, next slide. And here are some mental health services and resources. I would have sent a PDF for this document, so you guys can have it at the tip of your fingertips so that you can contact anyone, whether it's domestic violence hotline, rape crisis hotline, or even the Trinidad and Tobago Victim and Witness Support Unit, whereby they provide victim recovery and advocacy and support for victims and witnesses of crime. All right, so that is the end of my presentation. I want to say thank you very much for the time, and I now hand you over to Miss Graham.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tia Marie. This is indeed a heavy, heavy subject. I know we may also have some victims, and I would even go as far as to say we may also have some perpetrators here as well. But one thing that stood out is that as humans, we have resilience. We can change. As perpetrators, you can desist, you can turn around, especially if you're a Christian. We know that there is a power outside of ourselves that we can always turn to. And as victims, you must seek help. Tia just listed a whole bunch of items as to how you know it's time to seek professional support. When you realize that you really can't do it on your own. And I'm advocating and I'm encouraging you to be honest with yourself where you are in the journey. Sometimes I ask myself, I did a session before entitled a workshop, Who's Strong for the Strong? And there are times when you have to admit that I don't feel strong anymore. And there is help for you. Again, I'm going to put that plug in for the Haven, our women's support group. If you'd like to be a part of this, the link again will be shared in the chat. If you'd like to be a part of this women's support group where we grow and learn about each other as we desire to become our authentic selves in Christ. We have come to the end, but of course, we must have your questions. So I've got some questions coming in already, but before I go to those, because I have to sort them through, you can feel free to unmute your mics, put up your hand, so we can get them, so we can get all your questions, as we have about 5 minutes or so remaining before we end. So you can feel free to lift your hands and we will unmute you and you can ask your question or send it to me privately. I will ask it, or you can put it in the chat and I'll read it out. Okay.
Good night.
Yes. Good night.
I came on to know more about adult human rights because that is a new term for me. First question, one of the slide with if someone asks you to send a naked picture, and they send it. I don't consider that under adult grooming or whatever grooming, because you know that you're sending a naked picture, right? Nobody didn't fool you to send that. They ask, you sent it, right? And another thing, we keep on stressing on trust, but isn't it we have to develop trust in any relationship, friendship, the relationship with anyone, right? Your uncle, whoever, you have to develop that sense of trust. Right, so those two, and I think I had one more point. Well, with adult grooming, it's like, well, all women goes through a time of their life where they feel like less than what they are. You know, I went through that when I was younger, like in my early 20s, you know, went and meet Joshua's father, end up getting pregnant, was having a hard time at home and stuff like that, right? But it's something that I get myself into. So another thing, like, okay, say if I am if I'm married, right, and I'm going through some hard times at something at home, right? He shouted at me, making me feel low of myself and stuff, and I reach out to one of my male friends or somebody that I know, and I start to confide in him and tell them I'm going through a hard time. And men, that's why I don't believe in when you're when you're in a relationship. And as a female, you reach out to a male friend to tell them about your inside marriage, what's happening at home, right? I don't believe in that, because most times the other party will be like, you know, you don't deserve that, he's a nice person and stuff like that, right? And you start to feel good about yourself, and you end up doing something you're not supposed to, right? So those are just the 3 points that I wanted to make.
Thank you so much. Now, I hope I remember all your 3 points, but I want to just ask Deborah just to come back on to answer that question, which you asked about the adult grooming in terms of sending that naked picture, before I give my 2 cents. Deborah, so Katrina was asking, is it really grooming if she decides to send that naked picture to the person who requested it?
Well, you see, it's not just about sending a naked picture. There's just one isolated incident, one isolated aspect. So it doesn't contend to just that one. You know, it's a lot of things that would build up with the groomer and the victim that would necessitate this need from the groomer to, you know, eventually want to have sexual relations with the person. But most often, what they talk about online grooming, most of the time this refers to children and adults, rather than children and adolescents rather than adults, because adults sending a naked picture, it's consensual. They consent to do it. But when the child is coerced into doing something like that and encouraged, you know, or prodded, or you know, force them to do something like that, then that is one aspect of grooming, you know, which is sexual abuse, which, you know, comes into sexual abuse. But it's not just one isolated, just sending a picture. And most of the time,
it's an isolation. Yeah, it's definitely not an isolation. But yes. I want to say this. Thank you so much, Deborah. But I want to say this too, that adults do experience a level of discomfort if they are asked to send nudes, which, you know, nudes or nude pictures. And that is an indicator that you must be aware of. You can still feel uncomfortable even if you may like the person, or you have that desire or attraction for the person. But to neglect your feeling of discomfort when you are being asked to send nude pictures within yourself, that is something you need to be aware of. Also, oftentimes, while we are focusing on the sexual aspect we tend to forget that there are other areas within our lives. Ask yourself, do that person ask me to do other types of things that makes me feel uncomfortable? Ask yourself, do that person speak to me in ways that makes me feel uncomfortable? You know, so yes, we're talking about sexual grooming and sexual abuse, but there are other areas that you would know if you are aware of yourself, if you exercise emotional intelligence, that you really cannot deny. Because what happens is that they establish a level of normality and you feel okay here with it. But this person could take your picture, be upset with you, and threaten to blackmail you. What category do we put that in? You know what I mean? So again, we want to exercise caution in that, and we just don't want to go by the definitions per se of what sexual grooming, you know, that black and white definition, but we want to encourage and empower you to be so aware of yourself. Yeah, be so aware of your feelings and your values and your morals, that if anyone should ask you to step aside from that, you're able to discern that you're doing something that is not in line with your character. You know, and you also spoke about, Katrina, about a lot of women, you know, within that place of feeling like they need love, and that, you know, that phase, as you say, most all young women. I want to be careful that we don't make that generalization. Not just young women, but men experience it too. But we tend to be more vocal, you know, with our feelings in terms of women. But some women, I've met very resilient women as well. But we want to encourage each other to don't be secretive about the things that you face and how you feel, and even the feelings of insecurities. We want to normalize voicing and expressing how you feel. We want to change the culture. And that happens when we have sensitization sessions like this. It happens when we feel empowered as both men and women. We need to make changes. We can't just keep on talking and talking. We need to walk the talk that we're talking. So thank you so much for that, Katrina and Deborah. Any other question? You can unmute, but I do have a question I want to ask. The question is, how do you pursue justice? And Tia, you can answer this. How do you pursue justice when the acts of serial abuse is covered by one's highest positions, like a pastor? How do you pursue justice when the acts of serial abuse is covered by one's highest positions?
Okay, all right, thank you for that. That was one of the questions in the breakout room that I was in actually, and the persons in the breakout room actually shared the correct answer, whereby there are guidelines, all right, whether it's in the workplace, there are sexual harassment guidelines, and in a case like this, what can be done is to make a report first, all right, whereby the person would make a report to the sexual investigations unit or any police station nearby, but the referral would then be made to the sexual investigations unit, and then the investigation will then commence. If it's an adult or even a child. For a child, it would be the child protection unit, but for an adult, it would be the sexual investigations unit, and the investigation will start. What will also occur is that the victims will also be contacted by the victim and witness support unit to provide that psychosocial support for the victims.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We want to be real again tonight. From the time you are seeking that type of justice, you have to prepare yourself as the victim for what is about to unfold, right? So before you can make the report, or before you can even seek that type of justice, you would know that there is that potential of you being identified as the victim, some confidentiality or privacy being broken, or your story will become known to some, may not be all, but to some. And that would require you as the victim to be strong. You know, that would require you to have a support system around you. So my advice is, before you even go there, think about, who can I go to? I'm not saying not to go, but I'm saying you have to have that support around you. So build that support. Talk to persons that you can trust, so that when it really starts to unfold, when the police call, when you have a court, or let's say even the conference should contact you, you would have already prepared your mind to deal with what is going to happen, with questions, with persons, you know, reaching out to find out more or what have you. Okay, we have a question by Claudette Andrews. You can go ahead.
Comment I'm making. Sexual assault, abuse happens in the church, and sometimes the parents or the church leaders don't do anything about it because they say they don't want the church name to be dirtied. I want to say, no leader or parent or guardian can save the church. Jesus already died and saved the church. And having somebody's hurt being perpetuated or covered up is not Christ-like. In addition, we like to say that we don't want the perpetrator to go to jail. I believe in strong prison ministry. When they go to jail, we'll go and visit them and encourage them in the Lord. But don't let us have a child, a young person continue being hurting and we do nothing about it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ms. Andrews, for just voicing that. Pixie Dust, your hand is up. Speak to us.
Yeah, my question is, how do we prepare a child for that kind of attention? And as you were talking about before, you know, you as a victim, but we are adults, right? How do you then prepare the child that may be the victim?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, that question reminds me, when I was working in prison, and you know, there were certain visitation days, and I had to work with the children and their parents to prepare them for coming into the prison and what they will expect. And my answer to that is, there are professionals that are trained in those areas. Seek out the professionals. I mean, you could even begin the process by doing some research, you know, but reach out to the professionals to help you. If you as a parent or a relative, you're not sure how to go about it, seek the help, definitely. Another question from someone in the group, and I want to give this, anyone, Tia or Deborah, you can answer. Someone is asking, at what point or where do you draw the line between adult grooming and being caught in the act? Now, they came in late. So I guess they're really wanting to know, what point do you differentiate between the two, between adult grooming and being caught in the act?
When they say caught in the act, they mean courting? That's what they're asking?
No, I think they mean caught, C-A-U-G-H-T, caught in the act of probably sexual abuse or sexual activity. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, as it relates to grooming, there are clear guidelines as it relates to grooming, in the sense, as it relates to children. I'll start with children first. Ms. Debbie would have started that in terms of befriending the child, or online grooming, giving gifts, all right, whereby they would have develop a friendship with this child and make the child think that it's acceptable, all right? Adult grooming, in terms of you recognizing as the adult, is it that the relationship is progressing too fast? You know, this person is attempting to gain my trust. This person is exercising unconditional control over me. This person is abusive and toxic in the relationship itself. All right, so that is sexual grooming. Sexual abuse, as we would have shared earlier, is sexual assault in terms of any unwanted sexual act. All right? So there are clear guidelines between both.
Thank you. Deborah, Gibran, you wanted to say something on that before we go
Yeah,
on?
I was going on the same line as Tia, but to add, there are differences, but one leads up to the next, or one can lead up to the next. Sexual grooming is being cursed and it's being primed, and sexual abuse, I mean, that's the, how to say it, that's the final, the end result.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what it's all about, reaching that stage of sexual abuse and having control over the victim.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And in their minds, they may not even see it as sexual abuse, you know, but it's that gratification that they so desire. We have the hands up of Akisha Wells, and then we take AM. Akisha Wells, because we're looking to wrap up. Akisha, you can go ahead.
Right. I was wondering, I heard when you divided us into groups and you called us back, one group said that a question came about in terms of courting. So I was wondering if that should, if sexual grooming and assault should actually be in the same sentence of courting. And if sexual grooming can happen in terms of a relationship. This relationship is not just yet public yet, or to say that your community knows that you and this other individual are seeking each other. But as you said, it's all online. They talk a lot and stuff like that, but then it comes about where, you know, a person would invade your space and make you feel uncomfortable. You know, if it would happen, if sometimes those things happen where persons are supposedly should be in a relationship. The reason I asked also is because I know one of the presenters states that, you know, you could also have rape within a marriage, within dating and stuff like that. So those were my two questions.
Thank you so much. Anyone, Tia or Deborah?
Yeah. The main thing there is consent. All right. But you would have shared that this person makes, well, not you, but whoever it is, this person, hypothetically speaking, makes you uncomfortable. And this in itself comes back to that place of feeling coerced in some way. So that is the first thing that you have to ask yourself. Is it that I am given mutual consent? And we would have also explored the different types of sexual assault. That rape does occur in a marriage. It does occur in a relationship, because you have the right to say no. So many times we think, well, okay, I started, but then in midway you change your mind. But you still have that right. That midway, I could still say, I do not want this anymore, and this is my right. I can't say no at this point. All right, and that in itself is that thin line, and it really differentiates whether it is abuse or not. And if it is this person is now exercising that level of power and control or unconditional control over you, well, then that in itself shows that it is abuse. All right, because it should be mutual. Both parties should agree. Both parties should consent.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Deborah, you wanted to say anything to that effect?
The difference between courting, dating, and grooming is very, very hard to distinguish. I think one of the main thing there is secrecy. You know, this isolated tendency that the groomer would have to pull the victim away from anything else, and nobody should know. You want to meet in person. I mean, if you're courting someone, when you're dating, you go out in public. at some point. So as a victim or a person who is in that relationship, be mindful. Be mindful of what this person is doing. Be mindful of how he or she is acting. You know, this secrecy, this isolation, you know, the insistence to meet, and then you start this sexual encounters very soon. And you know, you feel uncomfortable, as Tia said, when consent is something that you have to be aware of. If you giving consent, if you feeling uncomfortable, that is another red flag.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, as it relates to intimate partner relationships, as adults, it's important that you recognize the red flags. Because for everyone, a relationship is different. For some persons, they might say, well, you know, I'm not ready to tell my parents as yet, so I rather we keep it a secret until, but it doesn't mean that sexual grooming is occurring in that relationship, but there are red flags to pay attention to in terms of how fast the relationship is progressing. It's not this person wants to get too comfortable with you at a faster rate. They are attempting to gain your trust and create a sense of dependency on them quickly. You know, is it that they are the groomer's desire is for unconditional control, right? Whereby they determine what you wear, where you go, how much free time you have. Another red flag is you can't say no to them, right? Or even that sense of always fulfilling their sexual needs, all right? Whereby the partner wears down your sense of autonomy, all right? Or even if it's, and you would recognize, if it is you recognize that the relationship is becoming abusive and toxic, all right? And you are in this traumatizing cycle of abuse, right? So there are red flags that you can pay attention to recognize the difference.
Thank you so much, ladies. You know, and even when you're talking about courting, I mean, how can you know someone if you haven't taken that time to build a relationship with someone? And if you're using the word courting, then I would assume you would have spent time with that individual to even consider that person for marriage. I mean, unless it's a case of arranged marriage, then, I mean, that's a topic for another time. But if you're talking about courting, then you should have that period of time where you would have given yourself that time to see, to witness, to observe, you know, certain interactions and behaviors of the person, not just of the person, but of yourself. And that's why I'm a strong advocate for self-awareness and emotional intelligence. You should know who you are, but oftentimes we do not take that time to reflect on ourselves, reflect on our thoughts, reflect on our interactions, reflect on our mindsets, and even reflect on our emotions. We as humans do not take that time. And yes, I know I'm making the generalizations, probably not all of us, but it's a skill, it's something that we have to learn to do, to reflect, to understand, to try to understand, who am I? What do I like? Why do I like that thing? Why is it hard for me to say no? Why am I stuck in this habit over and over? Why do I like to go with married men? Why don't I feel sexy? Why don't I like the idea of sex? Why, you know, we have to ask ourselves the hard questions. Thank you so much. I don't want to keep on talking. Let me take AM, you can go ahead, and then I'll take J and we will wrap up. AM, you go ahead. AM, I think that's Marshall. You can unmute your mic and ask your question.
Yeah, okay. So I'll start all over. When the person was asking, how do you differentiate between adult grooming and being caught in the act? I think, if I'm not mistaken, the person was asking, how do you differentiate adult grooming from outright adultery or fornication, right? And not the actual sexual act itself. The other thing is, I'm listening to everything and I'm you know, trying to have an open perspective, because as somebody said before, this whole terminology about adult grooming, not just grooming,
still has a few questions unanswered for me. And I think what is happening, with all due respect, is that we are taking all and sundry type of abuses, putting it in one pot and trying to create a narrative. Because we're talking about rape, we're talking about incest with children, and the majority of things we could only be really pulling from is from a child's perspective. When you reach an adult stage now is where things become a little blurry for me, because at that point in time, you would have a slew of experience behind you. Like, as I was saying, if you never, you don't have to try drugs to know the effects of drugs. And even if you find yourself in the company of somebody who takes drugs and they even egg you on to take it and call you all kind of names, you could say no. If you choose to go back into that person's company and surround yourself in an environment that you're not comfortable with, then you are exercising a perspective and a choice of giving in and putting yourself in a vulnerable position to break down your standard, right? At the end of the day, as you were saying rightly, so we have to ask ourselves the hard questions. Why am I attracted to certain things? Why do I behave in a certain way? I'm not justifying any form of wrongdoing, but at the same time, especially as women and men too, right? You have to determine for yourself, because listen, if nobody's holding you down, you're not shackled. This is not to say, most of these situations, you could move away from the space. You're moving back and forth, which means you have an escape route, right? So you're not in prison, nobody can put you down in a basement and have you shackled, and your movement is limited and restricted and at the mercy of the person who is holding you. You are going back and forth. That means you are constantly you have time to assess, to think, to react. You have, and I'm saying, if you don't have somebody and you're holding on to this perpetrators, quote unquote perpetrators, whims and fancies, then what kind of circle are you engaged in? What is your background? And if there's nobody that you could talk to and confide in, and you're seeing it even more fit to confide and to even find somebody who is invading your space and making you uncomfortable as your go-to person, then at the end of the day, is it really grooming? Is it really grooming, or you're just giving in? Because whatever is the pull factor, whatever is the stay factor, it means that something is going on in your mind that you don't have, you giving that person control over. Right? And again, I'm saying the majority, with all the respect of the persons who spoke, right? I'm saying that we're just putting a whole set of different types of abuses, and every situation is different, because rape is a whole nother perspective. Dealing with children is a whole nother topic altogether. To put an adult in a situation of a child is two different worlds that we're talking about. Unless that adult has been from small in an abusive situation where they're still currently in, then that's something different. But if it is that you find, listen, the moment somebody touch you or say something that is uncomfortable to you as an adult, and you have the power to either, whether you have the tenacity or the bravery to speak out and say, hey, don't touch me like that again, right? Move yourself away from that person. If you see that person again, whatever it is, you could remove yourself from the situation. If you put yourself back in, unless you're living in the same house, compound, or whatever it is, but you have to find a way to escape and to get out, whether you're physically able to do so in terms of knocking down the person, as we were saying in the group chat, in the group session, right? But I am still, to be honest, yet to be convinced about adult grooming. There's a disconnect, because from what I'm hearing, it's being taken from a child, and the innocence of a child, the inability of a child to fight back, as opposed to another. It's two different worlds. So that's just my contribution. I'm yet to, and as a person, and I think what the person was asking, how do you define adult grooming and plain outright adultery and fornication? The last thing I will talk about in terms of courtship from a biblical perspective, the moment you reach courtship, the next stage is marriage. Courtship is mutual interest, mutual attraction, and intent to be married. There's no grooming there. The only grooming is, here comes the bride and the groom.
Thank you. Thank you, AM. You know, you brought up some really salient points, and I'll just like to just comment on it before I allow either T or Deborah to speak on it. But it shows that there's definitely a gap, right, in the research, because it's hard. And everything you just said there just clarified that, you know, that it is hard for adults to even agree or admit that some form of grooming was involved, because a lot of literature and all of our language and jargon has definitely circled around children and their vulnerabilities. But again, we sometimes filter others through our lives and through our experiences. Deborah, I've worked in prison. I've dealt with victims. If you come in contact with someone who is emotionally vulnerable, if you come in contact with persons because of their environment and how they were raised, and if you see how that affects them, I think probably we would see things differently. It is so possible for an adult with the right of choice and to flee and to all of that, to become ensnared by someone who is a perpetrator and who is so versed with manipulation. Kudos to all the strong women who could say no and turn away. But for those who cannot, we are also advocating that we understand you, especially as professionals, dealing with women, both men and women, who sometimes when they're faced in these situations, they do not know what to say. They do not know how to act. They were never taught anything. No one had the conversation with them. They are afraid of the repercussions, okay? Especially when we know someone has been going through environmental stress, whether it be from their families, they feel that there is nowhere else they can turn. They turn to the most trusted source. And the most trusted source just may be a pastor. Your most trusted source and I think it's a hard pill for us to swallow, because some of us, we never grew up with it. We never grew up with that language. We never grew up with this. But it doesn't say that it does not exist. It doesn't say that there are victims that are experiencing this and need help, you know. So I want to say, and thanks for stating that, you know, you're coming with it with an open mind. That's what we want. And it's okay to disagree. It's okay to see things differently. But my question is, if you have a son or a daughter who you have taught them all these things, yeah, definitely, and they go out, you know, and I'm talking about an adult son or daughter, and someone took advantage of them, are you saying that it's their fault that someone took advantage of them, that they should have said no, that they should have cut it? Because I spoke to men and women who really thought it was going to change, who the perpetrator told them, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen anymore. Delete the text messages, you know what I mean? Don't let anybody see it because it's done, it's over, it was all in your head. How you could see things that way? Come on, you're crazy for looking at things that way? It happens. It happens. Okay, so, but thanks for sharing that. And I know there are other persons who share your view, and that's okay. We're here for that. It's okay. Thank you. Beverly, but I saw Jay hands up, but I saw it down now. But Beverly, you could unmute your mic and go ahead.
Hi, good night, everyone. I'm Verkisha. I must applaud you for a job well done. Amen. However, I wanted to answer to the person who just spoke. When someone have very low self-esteem, and Verkisha, you know the type of work that we do, and we meet people with extremely low self-esteem. When persons are also in pain, they become very vulnerable. So sexual grooming can happen because it have been happening for years. It's just for some persons, they only believe that it can happen to children, but yes, it can happen also to adults. And if you have a very low self-esteem, it can happen to you. And because your self-esteem is low, and you're not yourself, and you cannot think for yourself at the time, and you are looking to this person for that support, for that help, it can happen. So my thing is, what can we do to teach the church and to have sessions to open people's mindset and to understand sexual grooming, because it can also happen to adults. When someone is in pain for a long length of time, especially from their childhood, especially if they were abused, or if they're in a home with abusive relationships with parents, with their siblings, it can happen. So we cannot just bypass and say it cannot happen to an adult. It can happen to an adult, because sometimes you meet adults that get themselves in situation, and in your mind you ask, how did this happen? But in doing your assessment, you recognize that these persons' self-esteem are very, very low. So it is important, Verkisha, that we provide programs to build adult self-esteem, because adults feel self-esteem can only affect children, but it affects adults likewise. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beverly. Thank you so much. Beverly, I must say no. Thank you so much. You know, this conversation doesn't need to end here. You could definitely join us next week, Thursday, as we continue this conversation, which will be more in depth. We would look at, you know, factors surrounding the Keisha story. We would look at some personal stories persons would have, you know, spoke to me about, but we're really going into the questions. So join me, please, next week Thursday for Therapy Thursdays, where we talk about all things regarding love, life, and everything in between, okay? So you can screenshot again, get a hold of me. I'll also share this information. Therapy Thursdays, our mental health podcast. I invite you to that as we continue our conversation. Hear this now, yeah. I'm a Trini Twan. Hear this now. I've enjoyed tonight so much. If you have enjoyed tonight, you can put thumbs up in the chat. Do something, put your favorite emoji. If you think we should continue that. We want to have a workshop geared towards, as Beverly said, building self-esteem, creating awareness, building social emotional skills. We don't want it to stop just here. Okay, I want to thank you so much. You stayed on with me, the majority of you. It's 10:02. This is a heavy topic. I don't want all it to go just yet, because I need you to just de-stress with me, okay? So I'm going